Good morning, SHRM Memphis. We're glad that you're with us and sharing some of this holiday season. Though it's very different, it's still a special time of year. We hope that today's program will be of benefit to you and your employees. I'd like to introduce our schedule of what we will be doing today. And we're going to have our introductions, and I'm going to be flipping this over to our president in just a minute. We have our legal update as we do each month, and Jeff Weintraub will be delivering that. Our program will then run till about 12:55. We'll do announcements and final words and dismiss you by 1 o'clock. So now what I'd like to do is introduce Bridget Wilson, who is president of SHRM Memphis. Hi, Bridget.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Happy December. Cannot believe we have made it all the way to December. Seems like just yesterday it was January 2020 and a lot has happened. It is my honor and privilege to welcome you all to our last meeting for 2020. Exciting times for coming up. I want to make sure I acknowledge our last of the year signature sponsor, which is DataFacts. Thank you so much, DataFacts, for your continued support of SHRM Memphis and all that we do. And next, I also want to make sure we point out all of our other sponsors that we have that has sponsored us throughout 2020 and stuck with us. Thank you so much for your sponsorship. And now I have the opportunity to introduce you to Jeff Weintraub, our legal executive, our legal eagle, who has a great update coming up.
Thank you, Bridget. And my update is I'm trying to chime in with what Michael's going to be talking about, but I'm just going to cover the legal stuff. So I'll stay away from the topic. Okay. So we all know that rates of depression in the workplace are increasing. Workers are being laid off and furloughed, and there's depression involving being off work or furloughed. There's depression for employees who aren't accustomed to working remotely. There can be depression from employees that have to come into the office or the plant and work. So slide, please. What we want to focus on initially is the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And remember just a couple of points I covered in my last legal update, that employers don't accommodate disabilities. They accommodate the limitations arising from disabilities. If an employee can't perform a lifting function because of a disability, then that's what you try to accommodate, the inability to lift a certain amount rather than the disability itself. Slide, please. So in every case, as a point I made previously, all disabilities can be accommodated. There are no exceptions to that. However, the ADA requires only reasonable accommodation. So in theory, while everything is accommodatable, the accommodation in a given case might cost $10 million. Well, that's not going to be too reasonable for most of you. Slide, please. Remember that job-related stress itself is not a covered disability. Just because someone says, well, I'm really stressed out at work, I got too much to do, or you know, I'm stressed because I have to work 20 feet from someone and I suspect they may have the virus. That sort of stress is normal for any type of jobs. We all have it. And that is not a disability. So, and courts have held that. I want to emphasize that that's something that courts actually have held. However, sometimes stress can be a true disability where, thank you, Kathy, where the employee's depression, for example, substantially limits the employee's ability to engage in some major life activity. As we all know, the definition of a disability under the ADA is a substantial limitation on a major life activity. So yes, depression, mental issues of an employee in the workplace can be serious enough to substantially limit the employee's ability to engage in work or various types of tasks. Perhaps talking on the phone, if they're a customer service rep at a computer software company, talking to an irate customer on the phone who's screaming at them because their software is not working, and then they're losing $1,000 a minute. So that is pretty stressful for anybody, but someone with depression or anxiety and similar issues, that really could be a serious impact. Slide, please. So what we want to remember, the key for HR professionals always in these situations is patience. Patience. If your first reaction is to say, well, we're not getting the work done. We're not getting the work done, so we've got to fire this person. You're going to have a lawsuit out of that. The key is patience. And I sometimes tell the story of the company I worked with several years ago. The employee had various mental issues and could work for a couple of weeks. Then he'd get stressed at work, seriously stressed, and he would have to take a couple of weeks off. And that pattern continued over a period of time. We actually worked on that for a year. The employee had an attorney who was threatening litigation. And I told the employer, look, you've got two choices here. You can take drastic action now, i.e. a termination, and you're going to get sued. Or you can be patient and work with us. And he took the second route. We were patient. It took about a year, maybe 14 months. At the end of that time, the individual went on Social Security disability, agreed that he was totally disabled, even with or without a substantial limitation, and therefore there was no lawsuit in that case. So that's the key. Slide, please. Now, Kathy asked me to cover quickly two things: travel plans and vaccinations. You can ask employees about their travel plans, their holiday travel plans. Some are coming up, perhaps. If the returning employee could bring a virus into the workplace, yeah, you can ask those things. Slide, please. And EEOC has said that with regard to mandatory vaccines, having talked about travel plans, let's talk about vaccines now. So a vaccine is fine, but a mandatory vaccine is something that the employer imposes. Can you do that? Can an employer require mandatory vaccine? The simple, short answer is yes, you can. It's certainly in at-will states like Tennessee, Arkansas, and Mississippi. You can mandate that an employee take the vaccine. However, if you just go romping through the room like employers do sometimes, relying on at-will, you're going to get sued. Now, that's a very good thing because it supports the legal profession. So yay, whoopee. But if your goal in the workplace is not to support the legal profession, then I don't think you really want to just jump into this deal of mandating vaccines without really thinking it through. Healthcare workplaces obviously are going to mandate the vaccine, at least most of them will, and they're going to be the most insulated from any kind of successful litigation. All the rest of the employees that are not healthcare facilities, again, you have the right, but remember that employees may come up with arguments with litigation as to why they should not be required to take the vaccine. There could be religious reasons. The anti-vaxxers, some of them are religious based. And as an employer, you have to reasonably accommodate sincere religious beliefs. So that could pose a problem. You got to think about that. There could be ADA issues or medical issues where an employee can't take the vaccine because he's allergic to something that's in the vaccine. So you got to keep that in mind too. Slide, please. EEOC has, of course, said that COVID-19 is a direct threat in the workplace, but they haven't stated yet whether employers can mandate vaccines. We think they probably, I don't know if they're going to address this or not. They may not. Sometimes they don't want to give employers bright lines to go by. Here's a good rule that we think, because EEOC uses this for affirmative action and other things. We think the standard probably will be for mandating vaccines that vaccinating employees mandatorily must be job-related and consistent with business necessity. Keep that phrase in mind. Sometimes I shorten it to job necessary. So just be alert to the religious objections and the medical problems. Some of you may be dealing with the question of, is there going to be a fee? As I understand it, it's paid for by your taxes, so there's no fee, but the individuals administering the vaccines may have an administrative fee. Somebody may have to pay that. Maybe it'll come under insurance. Maybe the employer will be asked to pay it. We'll just have to wait and see on that one. And slide, please. And thank you very much. I think I did that within 5 minutes. Kathy and Bridget, did I make it? I hope so.
You made it, Jeff. Great job.
All right, good.
All All right. Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate you being here. And we've also asked Jeff to be alert to possible questions during the program in case there's some legal connections that we may want to pull him in on that as well. So if you have a legal question during the upcoming presentation, don't hesitate to put it in our Q&A. All right, let's go to the next slide. And I want to just make sure that you're jotting down on your calendar our next event. We're going to start 2021 off with a robust HR Connect. And I'm sure you will join all of us in saying, let's for sure say goodbye to 2020 because it was a year for the textbooks and the history books, and we don't want to keep that one around. So we have Sheree Coley, who is going to help us with something that's been difficult with remote environments and helping our employees stay remotely fit. She's a certified personal trainer with Germantown Athletic Club and works with people individually via remote sessions to help them stay physically fit during this time. She is going to be looking at remote fitness, while Marquita Jack, SVP and Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with First Horizon, will be helping us as we begin to lay plans for navigating the next workplace and helping shape our new workplace paradigms. This one is 5:30 to 7, so it's a little bit different time than we have right now. So you can register now at SHRMMemphis.org. I want to tell you a little bit about our speakers today and why we asked them to be a part of today's session. We try to plan our programs around things that are specific hot topics that HR professionals are dealing with. We go through SHRM National and some of the commentary and programming that they are offering, but we also listen to our members. And many have stated the concerns that they've had of dealing with employees during the workplace, and particularly the COVID workplace. We all know that employees present themselves as full individuals. They bring to the workplace the things that are exciting, like new babies and job promotions and spouse successes and children's school events, but they also bring to the workplace the times when they are stressed, depressed, anxious. And we know that documented cases during COVID-19 has indicated a real increase in employee depression. So today we have two folks with us representing Methodist Hospital and a group of people that are truly interested in the welfare of Memphians, people that are regionally with us, as well as your employees. So Michael Drake, who's the spokesperson for the Dennis Jones Living Network, and Allison White, who is a licensed social worker, also representing the Dennis Jones Living Network, are our speakers today. And I'd like for us to give them a warm SHRM Memphis welcome. So thank you, Michael and Allison.
Thank you, Dr. Tuberville. And as we begin, I'd like to say you are a doctor and you earned that title. And I'm happy to refer to you as that. We've been dear friends for over 20 years. It's a great pleasure to be back with SHRM. The last time I was in front of this body was in February of this year. And the title of my presentation was "What Happens When Behavioral Health Comes to the Workplace?" That was late February, and it was right before the pandemic. And I remember when we were speaking together, I asked on a scale of 1 to 10, where behavioral health amongst your ranks ranked in terms of priority. And everybody wanted to give it a 1, but somehow it ended up at a 7, 8, 9 on the scale because you were then so overwhelmed by trying to do so much with the resources that you had that it just wasn't possible. And now here we are almost 10 months later. And I had the opportunity to address the Tennessee State SHRM meeting last month. I would love to redo that poll because I know it's so important. Much has changed. And I want to, before I begin my discussion, uh, just to give you guys some shout outs. I can't imagine, because back then, you know, you were getting ready to furlough people and your jobs. And then you had to lay off people, and then you had to terminate people, and you had to downsize, and you had to deal with uh, all of the navigation that we've had to deal with in the 10 months. So I recognize what you're dealing with personally, which is a behavioral health issue in and of itself. So let's acknowledge that. The other thing I want to acknowledge is the beautiful positive news that we now have a vaccine that, again, only in Memphis and in the movies, as the late great Don Poyer said, you know, FedEx is a giant part of making this vaccine available all over the United States. It's the first great news we've had in an incredibly long, dark night. And I'm looking at the people who are on, just some of the people who I know who are on today, several divisions of FedEx, services, freight, ground, um, you know, Amazon, Nexair. I would love to hear what Nexair is doing about dry ice, which would be really cool. But I mean, really what Memphis plays in this moment in history is really so important. And I hope you guys embrace that in terms of what your part in this very historic moment is, but at the same time, to acknowledge the toll that this has taken on your teams, on you, and on your families. So you see this slide, the book in the middle is a book that I wrote called The Bliss Journey, Becoming the Hero of Your Own Story. I've written it over the past 15 years, and I'm a CEO since the age of 30, so almost 30 years. So I've led many teams and many people and many companies, and leadership styles never go out of vogue. I mean, the fundamentals are so important. But these are 14 leadership principles that were kind of channeled through me, that I was compelled to write this book before the pandemic. And I really believe that those principles are even more true today. Because when we're under stress, you know, reality is really important. So I'm going to talk a little bit during my presentation about what some of those principles are, but I wrote it from a behavioral health perspective. And the reason I did that, for those of you that don't know me, I'm an unfortunate subject matter expert. My paternal grandmother died by suicide when I was 16. My father, her son, died by suicide 8 years ago. And my mother, God bless her soul, was a wonderful human being, died in a nursing home 2 years ago. And she suffered from anxiety and depression her entire life. So, as I'm often to say, the DNA deck is not exactly stacked in my favor or my family's favor. But here's the beauty. I recognize the fact that I've been blessed, that I've been a very highly functioning depressive my entire life. And we'll get into the statistics as we go on in this presentation. But there's so many people around you, as you know, that are suffering, and many of you are suffering as well. And you've heard this saying, it's okay to not be okay. And we need to really embrace that. And the fact that we are navigating the same storm, as you've heard, but we're navigating in different boats, is so true. What we need to find is how we get the boats together, or we get into the same boat. So I am going to speak today as one of you. I'm a layperson. I'm a business person. I've been a CEO for 30 years, but I'm not a mental health expert. I'm just a patient. And that is why I have asked Allison White, who runs the Dennis Jones Living Well Network at Methodist, a real clinician, to bring us real medical advice of how to navigate. And as we get into the conversation, we'll speak about who Dennis Jones was and that genesis. And the other thing I want to say early and often, this is not a commercial for Methodist Healthcare. We're just here to try to educate this community. We have Baptist Healthcare, and we have so many other healthcare organizations in Memphis. All we're trying to do is create a conversation. So wherever you're affiliated or wherever you think your resources are, we want to help you to navigate to get to those. So that's my background. And with that, I would like to introduce my dear, dear friend, who I'm so grateful to you, Allison, for co-presenting with me, Allison White of Methodist Healthcare.
You, Michael. I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing your story. Like Michael said, my name is Allison White. I am a licensed clinical social worker here at Methodist Le Bonheur Healthcare. I supervise the Dennis H. Jones Living Well Network, which provides free, confidential assessment and referral to behavioral health resources. I've been a clinician for almost 20 years. I'm a single mom with 2 young children, school-age children, trying to navigate this COVID situation the best I can. My house is pretty dirty and I wore real clothes today. So if you're on the struggle bus, I'm right there with you. So we'll navigate through all this together, no worries. And I also, to share my personal story, I also have suffered from my own mental health issues after the birth of my first son 12 years ago. I experienced postpartum depression. So this is very personal to me, and this is why I'm so passionate about mental health.
All right, next slide, please. So I'll turn this over to Allison in a second to tell you kind of what the social media campaign is. But one of these great quotes that I love is, "Your wound is a place where light enters you." And that came from Rumi, who was one of the great mystics of all time. And actually, Danny Thomas, who founded St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, really embraced this quote. And the fact is, we're all broken through this. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And again, what I said before, you've heard, we're all navigating the same storm, but in different boats. But I think once we acknowledge the fact, number one, that we're connected, right? That we need to bring the boats together. We are navigating in different boats. And in Methodist, as I'm sure many other people are, and I see it on social media all the time, are trying to put out positive information about how to deal with your feelings, because your feelings are so real and such great feedback. And this has been going on, Allison, I know, for several weeks, and I think it'll continue through the holidays. So I'll turn that over to you and let you explain this. And hopefully people will follow this on social media. It's free. And I know I get it every day, and it's one of the highlights of my day when I begin.
Great. So we do have a Facebook page. And if you go to Facebook and search Living Well Network, this will pop up with this logo. And what to do starting a week of Thanksgiving until Christmas. Take a really good time during this process, just a normal year. How the COVID so we have access to our direct phone number to get help. So we have created unique memes, as you can see on this second screenshot. We're encouraging those and so encouragement, on Facebook, and so our phone number, you can't see it, it will be on the last slide, 901-762-8558. And again, it's free, confidential.
Please, everybody get off the internet. I've got a bandwidth problem. All right, so we can talk about statistics all day long, but I think it's really important. Whoops. Yeah, we can talk about workplace stats all day long, but I think it's really important to talk about a few key ones. And we've talked about these before, but I don't think people are really fully aware of what they are. And, you know, because I am a board member, a founding board member of the Dennis Jones Living Well Network, I've been speaking about this publicly for 10 years. And just as I get into this, I'll tell you the story of Dennis Jones. For those people who don't know who he was, Dennis was the chief information officer for FedEx, particularly in the early days. He retired in the year 2000 after 25 years of leading the technology explosion within FedEx. He was the guy that helped create their first website. He was the guy that helped us track our packages. He was that guy, and uber successful, came from Memphis, Tennessee, from very meager background, but worked really hard and was really innovative. And he left that company after a great 25 years of service, and he and I became competitors in the managed services space, because that's where I've spent the last 25 years of my working career. And we didn't really know each other, but we competed, and he was a great competitor. And so we really butted heads a lot. And then what happened in December of 2009 is he took his life, and nobody saw it coming. Not his wife, not his pastor, not his best friend, not me. And you've heard a little bit about my background and my story. So I knew when I heard that news what his story was. And there's so many stories that are out there today like that, or getting ready to happen. It's an equal opportunity offender. Behavioral health issues don't care who you are, where you come from, what your job title is, none of that. It attacks in really dark places. And so I've been talking about this for the last 10 years in the business community. And I thought, as a CEO, the first thing I would do would be to appeal to CEOs, if they weren't benevolent, at least to appeal to their bottom line. And as you can see here, you know, mental disorders are the most costly condition in the United States. And in our workforces today, you know, a quarter of our population suffers from mental health disorders. By the way, only 20% of them seek treatment, but 80% of the people who do seek treatment get immediate help. The other thing is 70% of people in the workforce suffer from depression. So kind of back to the dollars and cents of this, which I hate to be that way because my heart goes out to the first part of this is the human being aspect, but the human doing aspect is how much this causes a problem. And for those of you who don't know this yet, we heard from Patrick Kennedy 6 years ago, and he said in 2019, the number one workplace disability would not be heart disease, cancer, or diabetes. It would be mental health related issues, which are anxiety and depression. And he was right. He just missed it by 1 year. It came a year early. And I've been looking for these statistics, which I guess you can advance it one more slide. We have some more statistics here. Here's what I've really been looking for during, this is all pre-pandemic, but what I've been looking for is during the pandemic, what are the real statistics? And I think it boils down to these two. The CDC did a study pre-pandemic that said for every US adult in the workplace, pre-pandemic, 1 in 4 would suffer from anxiety and 1 in 5 from depression. They redid those statistics in September. And instead of 1 in 12 and 1 in 15, it became 1 in 4 and 1 in 5. That's a 300% increase in 8 months. And your audience, you guys, this audience has to deal with that every day. So I'm hoping somebody's going to put in the chat or questions or comments, how you're dealing with that, how that's showing up in the workplace. It's unbelievable. And I'll say one more thing, and Alice, I'll turn it over to you on these slides. When we had Patrick Kennedy here 6 years ago, the successor to Dennis Jones at FedEx as the Chief Information Officer is a dear friend of mine, Rob Carter. And Rob was sitting in the front row of the audience that day when Patrick was talking about this statistic: 10% of full-time employees has an addiction. Well, FedEx has 600,000 employees, and I'm not singling out FedEx, but it's a number. Each one of you have your own number of employees, so you can do the math. But for FedEx, 60,000 of their employees come to work every day under the influence or hungover every day. And can you imagine how that impacts productivity, culture, all of those things? So, again, as business people, we look at metrics. And these are things that grasp my attention that I just, when you see it, you can't unsee it. And I hope you know this, because I know you deal with this every day in the roles and responsibilities that you have. So Allison, that's my piece on the workplace. What would you say as a clinician?
Michael and Allison, we do
Sure.
have a question in the chat. Would you all like, or the Q&A, would you all like to address that question now?
Sure.
Sure.
The question is, as an HR professional, when I'm checking in on employees that are remote, or even that are in the office and want to be remote, is it appropriate to ask about their well-being? Are there things that are off limits? And what can I not share with other management team leaders? And after you all answer, we might want to pull Jeff Weintraub in too, there may be some legal issues related to that question.
So I think the first part of that is, yes, you can certainly check on your employees. You can just very general ask how they're doing, how are you adjusting to working from home or working in the office. If you have specific concerns, let's say you've noticed a significant change in someone's behavior, it's okay to say to them, and again, I'll let Jeff chime in if this is wrong, but I think it's important to say, hey, I've noticed that you're not really eating lunch with us or talking with us. I've kind of noticed that you're more tired than usual. Is there something going on that I can help with? If not, I'm here to talk to you when you want to talk or if you want to talk. I think that is certainly okay. Of course, from a clinician standpoint, I'll let Jeff chime in if that's not okay.
Well, I would say from a leadership or a CEO perspective, kind of like what I said before, Jeff, is you can't unsee what you've seen. And even pre-pandemic, I've always been very careful about the social media interactions that I've ever had with any employee, because there are things that, if I see them, I can't unsee them. At the same time, I'm a human being, and I want to really understand how people are navigating. So it's a really fine tightrope, I think, to walk. And I think it really comes down to performance. And I know we're going to get into a question later about performance evaluations during this time. So, for me, it's always been very uncomfortable. But at the same time, I try to keep it very high level. I don't ask people where they've been or what they're doing, because if they tell me they've been in a 400 person gathering this weekend, that's a big problem. But at the same time, I do want to check on just how they're doing personally. So I try to keep those conversations very defined to the person. And Jeff, hate to throw that on you, but I mean, it's a huge issue. So what's your advice?
Well, I'm going to answer that two ways. First, the way for risk-averse companies that really want to avoid all risk, the proper thing is to not ask about symptoms or feelings or any of those things that might end up revealing a disability, for example, which is protected by the ADA. For example, let's say you've got an employee that's in disciplinary trouble and maybe is on the verge of being terminated. And then you as an HR person ask him how he's doing, how he's feeling, and it gets into medical issues. And then you terminate him 2 weeks later, he's obviously going to sue for disability discrimination. Now, that wasn't the reason. There were performance issues, but you've opened the door to a lawsuit. Now, having said that, I'm going to take my lawyer cap off because Michael and Allison, I agree 100% with the way you look at this stuff. Many years ago, and I won't mention his name, an HR professional, they were called personnel managers in that day, it was like 25 years ago, wonderful, wonderful guy, and was a recovering alcoholic. This company hired out of AA. The owner and president was a recovering alcoholic, so he tended to hire that way. And the HR fella, personnel fella, had serious alcohol issues, and he ended up going to a motel room and he killed himself and killed his dog in the hotel room. Some of you may remember that because it came out in the papers at the time. And that was just so horrible. It just really affected me. And I really decided then that basically I am going to ask when I think there's a problem. And the rules I just told you to follow as a lawyer, I don't follow those rules if I think someone has a problem. I am risk tolerant, I guess we'd say, because if someone has a depression or mental issues, I want to find out about it so I can get them help. And I've done that for people in our own office over the years and for other lawyers. over the years, because being a lawyer is a pretty high stress profession. And so, you know, it kind of depends on your risk tolerance, but at the end of the day, I agree, Michael and Allison, I'm going to ask. Wrong or right, I'm going to ask.
Good. Thank you. Are we okay to continue, Kathy?
We have one more question, but if
Okay.
you want to go to the next slide, or I can read the question now.
Oh, that's fine. I wanted to respond to Michael's question when he discussed these statistics. I would just like to note that behavioral health issues are very underreported. So my guess is those percentages are much higher, but because of the stigma related to mental health and behavioral health issues, people do not report them as they would, say, diabetes or hypertension. So,
But the one thing I do want to come back to, Allison, just so we can wrap our heads around this, we went from 1 in 12 and 1 in 15 to 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 in 8 months. That's reported. So I'm just curious, again, how the audience is dealing with this, because this rolls down on their shoulders of how they're navigating this. And I'd love, as we maybe end the presentation, because we will have time for, you know, a lot of discussion of how we deal with that. I mean, have you ever seen statistics that have moved that dramatically in that short a period of time, particularly for health? I mean, can you imagine if we said, well, the cancer rate went from 1 in 15 to 1 in 4 in 8 months? What would we do as a society about that?
we'd be all hands on deck. So you're right, and I've never seen it jump the way it's jumped, because it's impacting every single person around the world. This is unprecedented. So I'm not surprised it has jumped that dramatically.
The question that is open at this moment is, how can organizations support both the person suffering from behavioral health issues and help their colleagues to support them with the appropriate confidentiality?
All right, Allison, may I take this, and I'm just going to like hand it to you on a silver plate. In my role as a CEO, probably the greatest investment I've ever made was investing in an employee assistance program. And it just so happened that it was with Methodist, but it could be with Baptist or wherever you're watching from. It could be from any healthcare provider. And that is obviously a very inexpensive, by the way, benefit, the most inexpensive benefit that the employee and their immediate family can take advantage of, number one, confidentially and anonymously. So there's no repercussion, there's no stigma, there's no fear in that. And what I can tell you, in my last company for 15 years, even though it was anonymous and confidential, Allison, and you've heard the story, I'm sure, 100 times, people would come to me and say, thank you so much for this benefit, because my spouse, my child, me, I would not have been able to navigate this without that benefit. So I think that's the number one thing leaders, employers can do. And quite frankly, Dr. Tuberville, and I said this before, you know, I was really surprised at our audience in February of how many companies in our area did not have an employee assistance program. And it's literally the most inexpensive investment they can make for the highest return. So Allison, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I certainly would agree, Michael, with regards to offering an employee assistance program to your employees. Also, just words of encouragement, weekly emails, those types of things. And I know we'll get into that a little later about what employers can do. But I certainly think offering an employee assistance, or at least having an open door policy of, if you're experiencing emotional distress or anyone in your family is, I can help direct you to an organization that can help you. So.
All right,
Okay.
Dr. Tuberville, let's go to the next slide, please.
Okay.
Allison, I'm going to give this one all to you.
All right, so sources of holiday stress. So of course, number one this year is COVID. People are experiencing job loss, financial stress, isolation, quarantine, not being with your loved ones, the loss of normalcy, and that's huge. The loss of just being able to get up, get dressed, maybe go to lunch and go to the mall or go somewhere else. Just that loss of normalcy is a huge stressor. And then of course, other sources are irrational beliefs, which we will talk about in the next slide in just a minute. Expectations, unrealistic expectations, and making sure that we looking at our expectations and making sure that they're realistic. Of course, financial pressures, especially if you're struggling with financial issues because of job loss due to COVID, that certainly is a source of holiday stress. And we don't have to go into debt buying for our loved ones. Just remember that. And then of course, unhealthy behaviors, which includes overindulgence in alcohol or food or other types of unhealthy habits. So next slide. And so these are just some of the irrational beliefs that we tend to have over the holidays. I must spend time with my family. Everyone will love the gifts I give them. The house must be beautifully decorated, always open for greeting family and friends. I must bake many holiday treats. I must do everything myself. And a big one, I can control the behaviors and experiences of others. That's a big one. And of course, all this can lead to frustration, resentment, sadness, anger, and depression. And Michael, we talked about this before. I look at this list of all these typical irrational beliefs that we have, and I think, what a year to start anew, to simplify, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this is a time to simplify your holidays. You don't have to bake for the whole neighborhood. You don't have to have your house beautifully decorated. This would be a great year to really start off working on simplifying the holiday season.
And that's great. It's probably not often that a presenter would ask the audience for advice, but I'm going to do that. That very first bullet point, I must spend the holiday with my family. One part of my story that I've not shared with you yet is I lost my stepfather in July to COVID-19 after 3 excruciating weeks in the hospital, of which we could not be with him. He died alone. We said goodbye to him on FaceTime. And for those of you who have experienced this, and I get emotional when I talk about it, it's the most overwhelming thing that can happen to you because there's no closure. So now, we went through Thanksgiving, and I have 2 brothers, one who lives in Hernando, Mississippi, and one who lives in Atlanta. And their families are in Memphis, and they and their wives are coming to Memphis next week. And my mother's birthday was on December the 22nd, and we would always, after she passed away, we would spend that time as a family together going out. And of course, we'd spend Christmas together. And we're like really struggling, trying to figure out how we're going to navigate that. I mean, we're so fatigued. We've been through this for so long, and I would call us very responsible people. But, I have a home in which we could be socially distanced. And my wife and my brother's wives are less enthusiastic about how we would do that. And so, Dr. Tuberville, maybe you put that in the chat or the Q&A. I would love to hear, okay? I would love to hear from the audience about how they're navigating that. At Thanksgiving, we set up several iPads around the table as if each person was there. And we did that, and that was nice, but it wasn't great. And we're missing that human touch. And I saw this wonderful news story last night about a young man who is a Boy Scout who, in his Eagle Scout project, created this hugging booth, right, with plastic that people could hug their loved ones. And I think we need some innovation like that. But I also think, again, I'm a practical person. My heart tells me I want to be with my family. My head tells me I need to go, you know what? Let's wait till the vaccine's over and we'll get together next Christmas. And I'm struggling with that mightily at this point. So again, I'd love to hear how other people are trying to navigate that. And I'm sure, Allison, you hear that, right, all the time from patients, right?
Of course, and thank you for sharing your struggle with that, Michael. I'm hearing this from patients and community members, especially those who are elderly, those with chronic health conditions that really need to isolate. They've struggled for, 10 months now? They've struggled for all this time isolating, and now it's Christmas and Thanksgiving and the holiday, Hanukkah and the holiday season, and they still have to do that type of quarantining, and it's a struggle, and it's a struggle for a lot of people. And yeah, I would love to hear from other people on how they're trying to navigate that all, if they're just having their nuclear family and not the extended family, or if there's doing Zoom. We would love to know some different ideas that people are doing to help navigate that. So,
Allison and Michael, I want to share something that some folks have been doing, and this might be something to think about. Some folks are doing drive-by Christmases. And so they actually set up a table in their driveway, and they have some prepackaged treats, and folks drive by and they hand it to them in their car. That is not the in-depth family experience we have had in the past, but certainly it is one of connection. And I participated in one of these myself last week, and I was giddy with excitement, thinking I was going to at least get to lay eyes on some friends and to be able to have that. And it worked out to be a really nice experience. I think we can get a little bit creative in how we do this. I think one of the things that NBC's Dr. John Torres has indicated is that this Christmas is significant, in that if we really use the head, as Michael talked about, we may be able to be with more of our relatives next Christmas. And so we do have to, there is that struggle between the head and the heart. But the drive-by Christmas opportunity, or any kind of outdoor opportunity, the weather may be warm next week. You could maybe gather for an outdoor socially distanced picnic, excuse me, versus a turkey dinner. And I think one of the pandemic positives in my mind is that we have learned a lot this year that we would not have learned without the pandemic. We now probably value those relationships more than ever because we've had a forced visit away from them. So I think little things that we can do keep our spirits up and keep us from maybe being burned out. Um, One of the responses from Janice is, my family is all in Southern California. And because of a 2-week quarantine, I will not be visiting with them this year. We are planning a Christmas in the summer after we've all been vaccinated. And I think, Janice, that's a great idea.
Great idea.
Great idea. Thanks for sharing. There's another one from Verlinda. I think this is an area where expectations need to be reset. At Thanksgiving, I saw only one family member. At Christmas, several relatives who normally come here are making the choice not to travel. So our gathering will be much smaller. We'll do some sort of virtual gathering in all likelihood. So that's resetting for the purpose of being safe and healthy and for the future.
And I think remembering too, Kathy, sorry to interrupt you. I think remembering too is that it's not necessarily going to be what's going to happen next year and the year after. This is one of those years where we'll have to make changes and, rework our expectations, but it hopefully won't be the same next year and the following year and years to come.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in on this. And again, Dr. Tupperville and I go back many, many years with our children. I was with my 19-year-old daughter, who's a freshman at the University of Memphis. She lived in the dorm this first semester, and her roommate moved out in the middle of the semester, and she's moved home and will not be in the dorm next year or next semester because there's just nothing for them to do and nowhere to go. So now, can you imagine being 19 years old and stuck with your parents, of all places? I mean, that's the last thing a young person wants. But we were really able to have a very honest and open discussion, and she brought this up. I think this is the real wisdom of youth and what our children are dealing with. And she said, Dad, she said, do you realize how grateful we're going to be to gather again in a stadium or an arena, or to go see a concert, or to go to any kind of event where there are more than 50 people? So I think there is something to look forward to. And I think, this hope of the vaccine that we're seeing is something that we need to promote and say, guys, it's going to take us 9 months probably, for community immunity to be able to go back to whatever the next normal is. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train, coming down to mow us down. The hard part is the patience. And I've heard this so much from so many people about being patient. And, I think we've just been like dealing in the moment, for the last 9 months. And I think now we see, what the future is, and it's probably 9 to 12 months away. But if we see it, we can get there. And I think that's what we need to really encourage each other about. And that's a very rational belief.
David DeFore has raised his hand. David, I don't know, our tech team will tell us if you can ask your question live. I'm not sure how we're set on that. If not, can you post it in the chat for us or in the Q&A? Okay, David has done that. What is the best way to handle difficult employee evaluations now and into the next quarter? And this is one I'm going to say Jeff Weintraub might want to chime in, because I suspect that could lead to some calls to his office.
Well, I know that question, and I'll defer to Jeff first from the legal perspective, and then maybe I'd like to weigh in from the corporate side.
While Jeff is launching, do y'all want to give your thoughts? There's Jeff. Hello, Jeff.
I'm sorry, about handling evaluations.
Performance evaluations, the difficult ones, not the happy ones where we promote people. That would be, maybe promotions will go up in order to be happy in the work culture. But how do you handle difficult employee evaluations now and into next quarter?
Well, addressing it from a legal standpoint, I mean, to me, you have to be honest. Employee evaluations are not praise opportunities to make somebody feel good. You're not really helping the employee to improve if you're just using it as a praise opportunity. You have to be honest and tell the employee what his deficiencies are first, and then how he can improve those deficiencies. I like evaluations where the evaluator writes notes at the bottom to give the person the guidelines and the rules about how to improve. If you don't, if it's just a praise opportunity and the employee fails 6 months later, whose fault is that really? Is it the fault of the employee? Well, yeah, I guess, but is it also the fault of the supervisor or evaluator who didn't tell the employee how to improve? And in litigation, this often comes up that, the plaintiff's attorney pulls up the evaluations, and this is someone we've terminated for performance, and we're saying he was terminated for poor performance, and yet the employee evaluation was used as a praise opportunity, and on a 1 to 5 scale, with 5 being the highest, he gets 4s because the supervisor wasn't doing his job. So,
Yeah, I would weigh in, and this really is pre-pandemic. In my 30 years as a CEO and managing people and managing teams, I have always thought that the best policy is to be completely honest, and that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. And as much as we want to be empathetic, sympathetic to people today, and given that we're working in different hybrid environments today, does not change business objectives. And as human beings, we can be certainly understanding of people's needs, and certainly the family dynamic of working from home and dealing with multi-generational households. At the same time, and we'll talk about this in a later slide, I think it's really incumbent upon managers to spend more time in communication with their team members, so that there's no surprise. And I have one dear friend in the UK who spends literally 2 extra hours a day checking in with her team members. And it might not have anything to do with their performance, but it has everything to do with relationship and understanding what they're dealing with. Again, Jeff, back to you, not asking very specific questions, but if you ask open-ended questions, it's amazing what people will tell you, right? And so gathering that information and understanding where people are coming from. But at the end of the day, one of the great quotes that I've loved is, came from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he said, if you don't like change, you're going to like your relevance even less. And we all have to be adaptable today. And if people are not being adaptable, they need to be aware of that. And we need to be able to compensate for that, whether that's helping them find another place and another career, or helping them find another place, period. But I think it's for me, I think from a leadership perspective, because everything comes down to people, is probably the most important issue. So David, thank you for the question about, dealing with evaluations, because the last thing people want are surprises, because we've had enough surprises in the last year.
May I chime in there to add one point?
Sure.
Please.
And this is to support Michael's comments, which kind of triggered something that I recalled, is that if there's an employee who has, people a lot of times ask me about when do you terminate? And some of you in the audience, I think, have heard me talk about terminations before. Since discipline is not about punishing, but is about helping people to improve, the time to terminate, basically, you should know when it's time to terminate when your HR gut tells you that further discipline is not going to help this employee to improve. And if you know that, it's time to be looking towards termination. But the bottom line is that by being a softie as an HR professional, who are you helping? Here's somebody, an employee that is not a good employee, is often insubordinate, doesn't do his job right. You know in your gut that he's not going to make it at your company, and you put off the inevitable because you're going to be soft-hearted instead of being honest. And so what it does is it leads him on thinking he's still got a chance there, even with his bad performance. So you're now wasting a year or two of that employee's work life. Because he's not going to make it at your company. You know that. And yet because you were soft-hearted, you weren't honest with him. You didn't tell him what he needed to do to improve. And the result is he's now wasting a year or two of his work life, when if you were tough and honest and ended up going towards termination and he goes to another employer, he may spend that year or two succeeding at that new employer. And I think, Michael, not to second guess you, but I think that's kind of what you were saying there. So sometimes always good to be honest, but sometimes you have to be tough as an HR professional too.
Yeah.
Jeff, just a quick question that came through was, let's say you've identified an individual on your staff who probably does need to move on to the next opportunity due to either the position has grown and the expectations have changed. Maybe they've been there for some time. What would be your perspective on the supervisor helping the employee to find another opportunity at this time?
Can I?
Were you asking? Oh, yeah, go.
Jeff, I'll comment from the corporate perspective. I think that's why it's so important that we don't have job descriptions, that we have position objectives. And so if a person is not meeting the objective, it's very objective to look at that and to be able to evaluate that, I hope, on a quarterly basis, so there's no surprise. So I think the time to do that is when the objectives are not being met, and to really be honest and understand why that is not happening. Are the objectives unrealistic? Is the person underperforming? Is it the not right fit for their talents? And I think to move back to what Jeff said, I think you need to move quickly in that regard, but it needs to be very objective, because I hope Jeff would back me up on this. If it is, it's certainly legally defensible, that it's not an arbitrary termination, that it's tied to realistic performance. So I think again, back to what Jeff was saying, I think faster is better than slower.
And to just chime in, yeah, I certainly agree with what you're saying there, Michael. And I know right at the moment I'm going through a situation, and I can talk about it's in another state, where the job has changed, and the guy who has been in this job for 25 years is no longer needed by the company. And the company, when the company brought me in about a month ago, they told me what they had done, and they had really done it the right way. They were honest with this individual, and they told him, look, we're going through, there's some downsizing. We've lost business because of the pandemic, and we're having to face up that this job has changed, and They tried to give him some training. It was not effective because there's technology involved. So they're very honest with him, and he basically accepted it. And what we did, the company was generous in our negotiations, and we gave him a nice severance package. And in my relationship with his attorney, the employee's attorney, I tried very hard to keep it very cordial, very respectful, and to make it clear that the company was not saying that he was a poor performer. In fact, he had been a star performer, and they had looked for other jobs for him and could not find anything because of the pandemic. And as a result, he eventually signed a settlement agreement, got a nice severance package. And honestly, the fellow is disappointed, but he's not angry, and he's not obviously not going to sue. It's all about honesty, I think.
Okay, are we ready to move on for
Please.
time purposes? I think we probably should.
Allison, I'm going to give you this one.
All
please.
right, so we'll just run through these, and we've talked about some of these. How do we make changes during this time? You know, first and foremost, talk with your family, talk with your loved ones, ask what holiday traditions are meaningful to them, and how can we modify them to fit the time that we're in. Also, it's a great year to start new family traditions. Maybe get friends and family around and decide what might be a new tradition for your family. Certainly simplify, less cooking, more Netflix, right? Avoiding financial overload. Let's not go into debt spending for our loved ones. Certainly helping others in need, finding a service project. There's still volunteer opportunities in the community that do not require in-person presence. Certainly coat drives, food drives, those types of things. And again, just placing emphasis on the meaning of the season, whatever that means to you. I think, and I'm very guilty of this with my kids, not remembering the meaning of the season. And this is a good chance to really sit back and to really place that emphasis on that this year. So.
Yeah, and I think in respect to, you know, people of different faiths, you know, we have Christmas, we have Hanukkah, we have Kwanzaa. They all have different meanings, and they are great traditions. And I mean, traditions are what certainly keep communities alive. And I think it's so important to do that. The one thing I would chime in on that is, again, I talk about this in my book, but you know, when I was at the end of my financial rope, at the edge of bankruptcy, the one thing I was encouraged to do was to go out and help somebody who was in a different place than me, that needed help more than I did. And it's counterintuitive, but I can't tell you how that changed my life. And you know, we don't have to be physically engaged today because of all this technology, but there are a lot of ways to help other people in need, and there's so much need that's out there. So my encouragement to the audience is, you know, if you're feeling that kind of anxiety and stress, is to even look outside of your nuclear family, even somebody who you don't know, who would never thank you, to be able to have the gift of giving something with absolutely no expectation of return.
David DeFore also has, from the workplace perspective, because when you talk about talking with our family, sometimes that's our work family, and changing how we do things. Obviously, we're not having big Christmas parties or holiday parties I'm semester-based this season. But David's idea is something that probably we could get creative and think about, and maybe even involve employees in designing it. At the Bank of Fayette County, we recognize that our connections between close but geographically separated offices were waning, and we needed to support those connections in new ways. Part of our solution was to create electronic connection opportunities through Fun Friday activities. These included bingo games based on things that occurred in normal office activities, a chopped recipe contest that everybody could do with bare shelf ingredients, a 20-second song that you wash your hands to, and how you will spend your stimulus check. And our team members got to share ideas, time, and fun with the other offices, and maintained, fostered connections even when they could not be with them. And I want to give David a HR shout out, because the other day I had to have a quick meeting with him, and he said, okay, I can do it, but I'm doing all different kinds of things, getting ready. And so when the Zoom came on, he was wearing blinking suspenders as part of his daily wardrobe. Well, everybody that he had been electronically connected with that day benefited from those glittering suspenders. So maybe for you, it's a Santa cap. Maybe for you, I've actually got from a student event last year, a Grinch costume. Maybe you have something that you do around the Don't Let the Grinch Steal Our Christmas campaign, recipe and cookie cook-offs that you can do with Zoom. And one of the things you might even raffle off is an Airbnb experience that your employees could do during the holidays with their family. Those Airbnb has been incredibly creative to create cooking classes and travel experiences that people can do through Zoom. You could have your employees do something together as a department. Maybe that's, since you're not spending those holiday party funds, you could spend it on providing some Airbnb experiences for your employees, or that also would work with your family. So I think one of the things to add to that list is creativity. And if we're servant leaders in our organizations, we think of what our employees need first before we're thinking maybe about what we're needing. And to that point that Michael just made, it's not only going to make them feel better, but it will make us feel better, to feel that we are trying to make a difference.
Yeah.
Next slide.
Yeah, well, one thing I would say real quick is thank you, David. He's a dear friend of mine over many years and a really innovative guy. I love him. So thank you, David, for that. We do have a slide at the end on how can we make employees feel appreciated. So you've already set the stage for that. So thank you very much. So Allison, why don't you take this one?
So, some of the healthy ways of coping, certainly patience, give yourself grace, and those close to you, give them some grace. It takes time to manage your feelings. Certainly focusing on the things you have control over. Of course, physical activity, it has countless benefits for your health and well-being that go beyond better stress management. And physical activity does not have to be sweating it out in the gym for 2 hours. It could be a brisk walk, it could be gardening, it could be anything that gets you moving. Next slide.
Yeah, so just I'll take this real quick. So on top of the physical activity, the daily routines, eat healthy foods, sleep, exercise. I have a chapter in my book that has gotten more response than any of the other 13 chapters, and it's called Spend 96 Minutes on You. And I made a deal with myself when I started my last company that I couldn't serve my team members and I couldn't serve my clients or my family unless I served myself first. And that might sound selfish to some people, but I tell you, it's very counterintuitive. It, for me, it was the only way I survived the very physical contact of being an entrepreneur. And I spent 96 minutes, or I spend 96 minutes every day on my spiritual, my mental, and my physical activities. And it doesn't have to be in the morning. It could be at any time. And the one thing I think that's so important, and I've been on a sabbatical for the last year after I sold my last company, and I've realized how difficult it is to stay in a routine if you don't have a routine. But those 96 minutes in the morning are so important to me, and it starts my day that well. So whatever your routine is, doesn't have to be 96 minutes. It doesn't have to be in the morning, but whatever it is, my encouragement to the audience is to find what feeds your spiritual, your mental, and your physical health.
Okay.
And this would be mine too, and I'll go quickly through this, but what I am learning in this last year, and I work with companies all over the world, and particularly this comes from really dealing with a UK company right now. What they're concerned about is job insecurity. It's like, okay, we've gotten to this point. We're going to survive the pandemic. There's this new or next normal. But what does that mean for me in 2021? I'm worried about losing my job or my job duties being redefined or having my hours cut or my pay cut or my quota increased, all of those things. So I think we all need to be aware of what people are feeling. And in that regard, I think the second thing is emotional intelligence, is really understanding who we are as people, as human beings, what our strengths and our struggles are, and working on our social skills. I mean, technical is great, but social is so more important today as we're doing what we're doing right now over a screen. Because people don't get the feel of our body language. They kind of get the feel of our language and of our cadence and those things, but it's not the same as being physically together. And one thing in my career, I have been a hardwired behavior freak, and really understanding not only my own emotional intelligence about my hardwired behavior, my strengths and my struggles, but the people around me, in creating teams with complementary skills around that. So I know as HR professionals, probably many of you use hardwired behavior assessment tools, probably for hiring. What I've not seen so much is in putting teams together, and even in team member reviews, of putting the supervisor and the employee together and reminding them of what the differences in their hardwired behaviors are and where they have the great probability to not communicate well because of those. So I really encourage a deep dive focus on that. And then finally, training, which is so important now, even virtually, for parity between what we certainly need in technical skills, but I think really right now, people skills are just so important in terms of empathy, listening to hear, and being present. Next slide, please. Allison, please.
So how can we make employees feel appreciated? These are just some good ideas. Weekly emails expressing appreciation, checking in with employees. I know that we talked about that before with the emotional distress type of subject, but you can check in individually or by department. Offer assistance and guidance as needed. Peer recognition and expressing appreciation via social media pages.
And in my last comment about that, Kathy, if you can take it back one more slide, is in my history in 30 years, I always had MVPs. And what we would do every month in team communication meetings is have people nominated for MVPs that were associated either with our core values or our 10 commandments. And when we gathered as a team, people would nominate them, they would second that nomination, and the people that did that would have to speak on why they did that. And then at the end, the person who was singled out, we asked them, why do you think you were nominated and what was special about that? And the mere fact of giving a person who's recognized in front of other people, no matter how introverted or fearful of speaking that they are, I always noticed that when people had the opportunity to say, hey, this is what I did and this is how it can help you. It's so simple, but it was so powerful. And I think it's even more important today from a peer recognition perspective, and probably more so, we used to call it the MVP for an individual. I think now it's kind of translated to teams because it takes so many people today, virtually, hybridly, to do that. So next slide, please.
And here are some resources for everyone. As I mentioned, I'm with the Living Well Network. So the graphic on the left of my screen is our brochure. We have our website there. On our website, you can find a variety of articles, some self-help guides. You can actually take self-guided depression and anxiety screenings. That's our phone number and our Facebook page. And of course, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 1-800-273-8255. And also in our community, just a sampling of local resources. Methodist has an employee assistance program, as well as Baptist. Alliance Healthcare Services, Church Health, and Lakeside are all good resources that we have locally, as well as others. Next slide. Next slide, yeah, Dr. Tubble.
I'm trying, it's not working with me, sorry.
Okay, and of course, if anyone needs more information about the employee assistance program that Methodist Healthcare provides to companies, you can give us a call at 683-5658, and we have a website, MethodistEAPcanhelp.org.
All right, well, thank you, Allison and Michael. Certainly an informative discussion, and I appreciate all the questions that were sent in. And I know that Michael and Allison would both love to connect with you on LinkedIn. So make sure you check them out, and also check them out for other resources that you might need. Want to end on a happy note. We've had some heavy content today. We are in a heavy content time, but we can look forward to 2021. And I personally have a lot of hope and a lot of plans for 2021. We're going to start SHRM off on with our HR Connect. So go to our website and register. We gave the details a little earlier. We have our February 16th meeting already available for registration. And this is kind of one of those pandemic positives. And that's a new phrase I'm using with as many things as I can find, a pandemic positive. And part of this is that we have access to speakers that we would not have had. Sheila Vinzeller is the CHRO of a $3 billion company, Aptar. She's located in Chicago. She was formerly with International Paper and a part of the SHRM D&I Advisory Board and speaker at earlier events. And so she's going to be talking about how she creatively leads literally a global organization. She has people in China, Europe, Africa, all over the globe. And she's pretty much a 24/7 kind of CHRO. So she has great techniques. She's really weathered this unusual leadership challenge well. So you'll want to hear from her. Our 2021 legal conference is set for April 20th. Make sure you get your seat today. And we do have a super early bird opportunity too for those of you who register before January 15th. Don't forget to complete your evaluation of today. And always, we want to make sure that you are sending to us information that you'd like to see. If there are things that you'd like to hear from or opportunities you think you'd like to introduce to us as future ideas, make sure you email me or Bridget Wilson or David DeFore as president-elect, and we'd love to hear your ideas. So we look forward to 2021 on behalf of the SHRM leadership team and all of our SHRM membership. We want to wish you the best of this holiday season. We hope that you have hope and inspiration, and that we all collectively look forward to 2021 and wave 2020 by in the rear view mirror, and know that we're going to turn it over to the history books going forward. Thank you for your time today. We will be emailing out the certificates for those of you who have completed the session, and just happy holidays and a prosperous new year for 2021. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, everybody.